Yeah, so thanks for being here, everyone. Really excited to have this conversation today. I know we kind of double booked with maybe the Pope and some of the synod process that's happening. So thanks for rolling with us and continuing your journey of Zoom meetings for the day. So today we have Kate and Angel from the Center for Environmental Transformation. And so I'm just so grateful for them to be here and just wanted to give them a moment to introduce themselves to the group before we get started.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
It's wonderful to be here. I am Kate Jackson, and I am the Environmental Justice Coordinator for the Center for Environmental Transformation. Excited to tell you more about our organization today. We were founded in 2005 as part of the Sacred Heart Church. Father Michael Doyle was the inspiration for environmental justice organizing in Camden. And the intent of our organization was responsibility to the earth, to plants, to animal, to people, and to justice. And now we're a thriving but very small nonprofit. There's 4 of us. Our organization is actually based out of a former convent, and we have a youth programming component, a retreat center, as well as an environmental justice arm of the organization, which is where my role is housed. And we excitedly just hired a brand new co-executive director of environmental justice. So I'm going to pass it to him, and that's Angel.
Hello, everybody. My name is Angel Perez. I am the new co-executive director of CFAT for Environmental Justice. I've been here about 6 weeks now, so I'm very excited about the role I have here and being able to push forward our agenda and making the world a better place as best as we can. I'm a Camden City native, so I'm from this environmental justice area. And I look forward to speaking with you and hopefully answering some questions and hopefully educating some people and having a good time today.
All right, thanks so much. Yeah, so we're excited that you are here with us. So today, I know that I got the content out a little bit later than I had hoped this month, but this month we are focusing on this idea of integral ecology and specifically today, environmental justice. So to begin, we are going to start with a prayer and, we recognize that this morning, the invasion of Ukraine began, and so we uplift this this idea of integral ecology as the intersections of war and environmental justice and social justice and politics, right? It's all interconnected. So we felt that it would be important and appropriate to start with a prayer for Ukraine today.
Thanks, Brenna. It's lovely to be with you all again. As Brenna said, we recognize that all of these issues are interconnected, right? And even though we're gathered here primarily for environmental justice, we cannot have environmental transformation without a real, unified peace in our world. So let's just take a moment to center ourselves in the presence of the Spirit. In the name of Father, Son, Holy Spirit. How do we pray for peace from half a world away? How can words salve and soothe real wounds, assuage real fears, wipe tears from real eyes? God of endless compassion, transform our prayers from words into bridges that span the distances between us, uniting our hearts in yours. Every time we turn our keys in a lock, may we remember all who are losing their homes. Every time we step into our cars, may we remember all who are having to flee. Every time we embrace our children, may we remember all who are trying to shield theirs from war. May our besieged sisters and brothers be drawn into the arms of the suffering Christ, and may our cry be heard as one voice, ringing out from every corner of the earth. God of endless mercy, grant us peace. Amen.
Thanks, Meg. We also begin, as we always do, with a land acknowledgement, and I live in what is currently called Cleveland, Ohio. And today, to begin, we recognize the land upon which we reside, and I express gratitude to the Native people who lived and worked here before me, those whose stewardship and resilient spirits have sustained the sacred land, which is the traditional homeland of the Erie, Lenape, Delaware, Shawnee, Wyandot, Miami, Ottawa, Potawatomi, and other Great Lakes tribes, as well as the nearly 28,000 Native American residents who currently still live in this area. And then finally, as always, we acknowledge our context and just take a moment to remember that we are gathering in an unprecedented moment of human impact on the planet. We are gathering, especially as we prepare our hearts to talk about environmental justice today, at a time when many people across the world are being impacted currently by environmental justice issues and environmental racism. And we do this just as a remembrance that these discussions are important and that they will have impacts for people now and in future generations. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and then just to get us started, I wanted to just share a bit about the theme for today, and then I will hand it over to Kate and Angel. So basically today we are focusing on this theme of integral ecology and, in the spiritual exercises, this idea of the contemplation of God's love that occurs at the end of the exercises. And as I was rereading Laudato Si recently, there was a quote that really spoke to me. It's from 231. It says, "Social love moves us to devise larger strategies to halt environmental degradation and to encourage a culture of care which permeates all of society." And particularly as we think about this culture of care and integral ecology, I really found as I was rereading through Laudato Si, there are kind of two main components of integral ecology. So this idea of our social and environmental and political and economic systems, right, all being interconnected, right? So when we talk about one of them, people are being impacted in other spheres. Additionally, when we think about integral ecology, Pope Francis really calls us to think about the idea of interconnection and love. So this idea that we are interconnected, and kind of the sense of awe and gratitude for the giftedness of this life and this interconnection that we have with creation and for our lives. And so I think that this idea of our interconnection ties in so nicely with the spiritual exercises and this idea of gratitude, and particularly in the contemplation on God's love. St. Ignatius, that's, I think, where the quote that we often draw from, "Love shows itself in deeds more than in words," is located. And it's really this idea that if we really have a heartfelt sense of everything that we have been given and this sense of love and gratitude, then the natural response is to respond in love, to be overflowing in this response of heartfelt love. And so as I think about social love, I think this ties into environmental justice very clearly. We see these intersections between environmental justice, racial justice, public health. And I mean, we've seen this really explicitly during the COVID-19 pandemic. And so how is our sense of love and giftedness overflowing, and how is it encouraging us to enact social and political love as we deal with these environmental justice issues that are at the intersection of a lot of these crossroads? So with that, I will turn it over to Kate, and excited to learn more about your work. And we will have plenty of time at the end for questions.
All right. So Angel and I are here, like we said, from the Center for Environmental Transformation. And I'm just so thankful for this focus on the interconnection and on love between people and environment and justice. That is exactly what drives our work every day, is a love of earth and a love of people and a love of justice. And you're right, it all happens in the environment. Everything is connected. Housing and transportation and access to food and access to clean air and water is all happening in our environment. So today I just wanted to share with you a little bit about environmental injustice and racism, and give you a glimpse into life in Waterfront South, in our neighborhood in Camden, New Jersey, both because it is an environmental justice zone where folks are overburdened by pollution and injustice, but also because it is a beautiful and thriving space where we are all engaging in advocacy and in justice activities to bring about the ability for folks to thrive in our neighborhood and community. And I'll share with you the ways in which we do that through our pillars of justice. And I know that we have lots of wonderful questions to discuss afterwards. So if you could share with me, maybe in the chat box, or if I'm not sure if folks are able to be unmuted, but what comes to mind when you think of environmental health? A word or an image?
Fresh water.
Fresh water, yeah.
We have someone, Karen said clean air.
Clean air, yeah, absolutely.
Not pollution.
Yeah, a lack of pollution.
We have a free from pollutants that can cause medical harm from a Julia.
Yes. So as you're saying these things, it really does tie in with what environmental justice is as well. So if you have any additional ideas or words or images that come to mind when you think of justice in the environment, please feel free to share those now as well.
I've heard so many cases of people who live in projects or in poorer neighborhoods where they don't have the sanitation facilities that they need, or where companies are just emitting noxious gases into their environment. And this is happening all over New York City and outside of our city. So I'm sure it's happening in New Jersey and other places as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, that paints the picture, truly.
Big thing would be equity, fairness for all, and not dumping in one neighborhood and, not in another, you've got to have this sense of equity.
I love the word equity.
We have some comments in the chat. We have that everyone has access to clean air and water and nature and natural areas. The ability to have the ability to speak and have your voice heard when a project is there to harm you.
Yeah.
We have a couple of them, like green spaces and not exploiting poor communities. Those are what we have in the for environmental justice.
Those are powerful words. I appreciate that. Thank you for sharing that with me. I share that because I want to just paint the picture, and perhaps you already know it because you just touched on so many of these important issues of health and justice in the environment. But research has shown that the two greatest determinants of your overall health and your lifespan are, one, the color of your skin, and two, your zip code. And so we term this environmental racism because the burden of environmental toxins and hazards fall predominantly on people of color and low income. And race is the most significant predictor of a person living near contaminated air, water, or soil. So the numbers here just paint that picture a bit for us. 56% of the population near toxic waste sites are people of color. Higher exposures to nitrogen dioxide, which creates respiratory illnesses, asthma, and like someone had mentioned, less access to clean water and modern sanitation. But one of the things that often gets overlooked is not only are folks facing more pollution, but they're also less protected. So we have the Environmental Protection Agency, which is in place to protect communities from the harms of pollution. However, research shows that communities of color have 95% of their claims against polluters denied. So not only are folks experiencing more burden of environmental injustice, but they're also not having their cries for justice heard or acknowledged. And that is, that's creating what I call, or what folks call, a cumulative impact. And this is the combination, like Brenna was talking about. It's not just pollution, it's also the type of housing that you have access to. It's the type of educational systems that you have. Do you have access to healthcare? What are the high school graduation rates? What are the disparities that are in the built environment around you? Do you have access to green space? Do you have access to clean air and an income that's stable? And how all of those come together to create a cumulative burden for folks that live in environmental justice communities. And that's what we focus on at the Center for Environmental Transformation. We do focus on pollution. We're fighting for clean air and clean water, but we also recognize that we need infrastructure and investment in the broader environment so that folks can be healthy and thrive. So the first wave of environmental justice movement came out of the 1980s, led by an incredible group of organizers of color, calling attention to the fact that all of these hazards were falling on communities of color. And now we have a plethora of data showing, as I said, that the majority of folks that are experiencing environmental justice are communities of color. So the second wave of environmental justice is going upstream. We see the impact downstream. We see the asthma rates. We see the heart disease. We see the increase in environmental stress-related diseases. Now, how do we go to the real problem? Where is it coming from? What are the policies? What are the practices? And how do we get up to the upstream and stop them from ever happening in the first place? So I want to introduce you to our neighborhood in Camden, New Jersey, because I think it paints a really important picture of an environmental justice community and the opportunity there is for pursuing justice. So we are in the waterfront south in Camden, New Jersey. And I want to share with you first a story from one of our best friends in Camden. His name is Christoph Lindsay, and he happens to be an avid gardener in the city and also a social justice advocate for his community. And we spend a lot of time with Christoph. And he shared with me one day something that just really struck me, and I wanted to share it with you. So I met him in his garden, and before we could even step foot in his garden, he started pointing out to me all of the polluting facilities in his neighborhood. He said, you have a concrete plant and a metal recycling plant. You have the county sewage plant where 26 municipalities send all of their sewage. You have the cogeneration plant, the trash to steam incinerator, which again is from 26 of the surrounding municipalities sending all of their trash to our little neighborhood in Camden. And you have Holtec, which manufactures parts for nuclear reactors. And they received $260 million of tax breaks to come into the city. So they received money to come into our environmental justice neighborhood, and they don't have to give anything back in return to a place that really needs investment to fix roads and to fix outdated plumbing systems like Christoph's. So he looked at me and he said, what would you call it? And he said, it's violence, and it's preordained, and it's orchestrated. And this is a list of the 26 different polluting facilities in our 1 square mile neighborhood. At any given point in time, there are 37 different types of air toxins that people are breathing in. And there is zero protections against the cumulative impact of all of these intersecting forms of pollution. And it leaves folks feeling very vulnerable and very under attack. So Christoph also pointed out to me the broader context as well. And you can see between the two buildings, right, there's gaps. And obviously those used to be homes. And he described those as the missing teeth in the smile of his neighborhood. Those were spaces where his family and friends used to live, where there were businesses. And he was telling me about all of the wonderful things that had happened in his neighborhood over the last 50 years. But that he saw an extreme change in his neighborhood with policies like redlining and disinvestment and white flight, which took a really important tax base out of the neighborhood and left the city in disrepair. And he talked about that in terms of sadness and trauma and feeling left behind. I share that because what Christoph shared with me is how a lot of our residents feel. They feel left behind, they feel invisible, they feel dumped on. They've been promised time and time again that there will be no more industries put into the neighborhood, and yet it continues to happen. So in our neighborhood, it's majority Black and Hispanic residents. The median income is $22,000. 33% of folks live in poverty. We actually had the very first environmental justice lawsuit to sue the EPA and the DEP based on civil rights, and it made it all the way to the Supreme Court. And it really set the precedent for environmental racism being a civil rights issue. There's about 2,000 people, 74% with high school diplomas or less. And again, there's 26 industrial facilities. So 1 in 3 of our children have asthma. They miss a lot of school because of it. And there's, of course, increased health costs because of it. And only 35% of folks own their homes. And there's always a tension between, do we bring in more industries or do we build up more housing? And how do we protect the folks in our neighborhood? So we have few pillars of justice that we follow at CFET in response to this environmental injustice. The first is that we build interdependence. And this acknowledges the fact that my health is tied up to your health. Your health is tied into my health. Our neighborhood is tied into the broader context of our city, and everyone's health, everyone's well-being is tied together. So we believe this means we need to work together. So we create networks with other nonprofits, with community groups, with statewide organizations to come together around common goals for environmental justice so that our communities can thrive. So we work with the NAACP, we work with the New Jersey Environmental Justice Alliance, we work with our local resident groups to make a louder stand against these policies and practices that are harming our communities, because we need each other in order to make change. The second thing that we do is that we grow leaders in environmental justice, and we do this in 2 ways. The first is through our retreat center. Actually, we do it in 3 ways. The first is through our retreat center, which we welcome college students to our space in Camden. We have a 28-bed facility where folks can come and spend a weekend, a week, and learn with us about environmental justice. They learn about sustainability, climate justice, and our responsibility to one another and our collective thriving. We have a great curriculum, Angel's putting together some great events for folks to be engaged in the community. The second way we do this is we empower our own residents. We're building an advisory committee built of our local residents. Our board is made up of our local residents. And our goal is always to connect our residents in our neighborhood with the resources they need. So that means that we connect them with lawyers, we connect them with experts on a multitude of issues that they're facing, so they feel empowered to be at the table and take control of their neighborhood. And the third way we do it is through our youth retreat program. And this is one of my favorite things that we do. Each summer we hire 12 youth from Camden, and they come and work with us on our urban farm. They learn about regenerative agriculture, they learn about climate justice, they learn about their own environmental justice hazards. Many of them have grown up in Camden and know that there's a smell, or they know that there's explosions, but they don't know maybe where it's coming from or what the impacts might be. And so we really educate them on how they can be involved in environmental change making in the neighborhood. And they love the gardening and the farming. They have a farmer's market. They also make their own hot sauce and honey, which is really cool for them to gain important skills. The third pillar for us is that we support community sovereignty. The environmental justice movement is a grassroots movement that acknowledges that people of color in these communities, they know what they need, and they just need somebody to come alongside and give them support and the resources that they need to make the changes they want to see. Communities know best what they need and how to do it. So all of our work is guided by community. Community tells us what their concerns are and how we can help them to meet those needs. And we honor that they have the right to clean air, clean water, access to food, access to green space, and safety in their environment. And lastly, we work for transformative action. So we're trying to get upstream. We meet the immediate needs through our farmers market and our youth training, but we want to make sure we're always trying to get to the systemic issues. So we are active in policy and advocacy at the local and county and state levels. We've been successful in fighting a program that would have given more funding to expand the trash to steam incinerator. We've been successful in implementing greater controls over polluters in our neighborhood. And we helped to create the New Jersey Environmental Justice Bill, which is the strongest in the nation in terms of holding industries accountable and measuring those cumulative harms that I mentioned earlier. And it's the first of its kind and the strongest of its kind in the nation. So we are building interdependence with other folks. We're growing up leaders in environmental justice through training and education and empowerment. We're listening to our community. We're humbly walking with them, using our positionality and privileges to support them. And we're working towards transformative action so that we're getting to the root of environmental injustice. These are a few photos. The first is our greenhouse. We do seedling giveaways, and of course our farms and gardens provide produce to, I believe we usually get around 300 folks to our farmers markets each summer. We host hundreds of volunteers each year to come out and do beautification projects and work in our gardens and also work with our youth. Another photo of our lovely farm right in the middle of the city. And we also do beekeeping, which is fantastic and a nice surprise for most folks who aren't expecting that in the middle of our neighborhood. And again, our farmers markets are a great hit, and our youth do a wonderful job managing this and being part of the community and getting food out to our local residents. And it's really beautiful. So I want to leave you with a project that we did most recently because it comes from our youth, and I'm partial, but I think that that's a really powerful space to learn from the folks in our community. And these are all local residents to Camden. These are our youth and our youth program. And they decided this summer that they wanted to do an environmental justice project. They wanted the mayor to listen and to hear their concerns about their neighborhood. So they worked on a project with a photographer who came out and helped them learn, important photography skills. They took pictures of their neighborhood. They identified the beauty of their neighborhood, the spaces they loved, and also the spaces that were in despair. And they wrote poetry and they wrote letters to the mayor asking for an environmental justice task force, an environmental justice assessment, and asking for immediate change in their neighborhoods. And it was really empowering and beautiful. So Angel and I are just going to go back and forth and read a few of their words for you so that you can hear straight from our youth how they define environmental injustice and what they would like to see happen. Industry says, we're good for the community. We create jobs. Yet the neighborhood says that the industrial booms keep us up at night. The trucks block our streets. The trash piles grow bigger and the stenches you make keep us from going outside. You say you benefit the minority, but hurt the majority. Your damages you've caused don't outweigh the good you've done.
Industry says we pollute within our legal limits. Yet the neighborhood says our children have significantly higher rates of asthma. We say 25 industries polluting within their limits adds up to more than something we as a community should have to bear.
Industry says it takes a lot of money to do the right thing. Yet the neighborhood says the city gave you multi-million-dollar tax breaks just to move in. We say, who's going to pay our hospital bills when the people in poverty bear the brunt of it after you're the one that contributed to it?
Industry says, we never thought about the neighborhood. We thought about the customer. Yet the neighborhood says, our voice isn't heard. Nobody cares about us. We've complained our hearts out, but nothing happens. We say, it's clear the county thinks our neighborhood is disposable.
Industry says, accidents happen. That is just the nature of the business. Yet the neighborhood says that you caused a fire, which forced us to evacuate our homes, scared for our lives. We say it is not an accident if it keeps happening. It's not an accident that you're not held liable for all the damages you cause. How many times do accidents happen before it starts to feel on purpose? So I end with this quote from my very favorite civil rights agriculturalist, Fannie Lou Hamer. And she says, "Nobody's free until everyone's free." And this is the motto that we do our work at CFET by, because the environment touches on every aspect of everyone's lives. No one is free until we are all free. And so our space is a space where we come together and recognize the interconnectedness of our bodies, our lands, our health, and we work for structural change. We work for systemic change that's going to bring about the ability for a community like ours to thrive. And I'm looking forward to the discussion that we'll have here today. And I'm happy to answer any more questions about the work that we do. And I'm thankful for this time with you today. If you'd like to join our movement, you can screenshot this QR code or you can contact me. We have a newsletter you can follow. And we will send you updates. There's always opportunities to help us with a campaign or two. And feel free to email either myself or Angel, of course, anytime.
Thanks so much. Yeah, Kate, thank you for sharing about the work that you're doing. I think for all of us here, we're going to open it up to questions and answers, but I think in just kind of relating this to the context of the Laudato Si action platform, it's really interesting. The seventh goal of the platform is community resilience and empowerment. And so Kate, just hearing you speak about that seems like that is central to the work that you all are doing. So thanks for the great example. So yeah, if anybody has any questions, feel free to unmute and we'll have, about 5 or 10 minutes for questions and answers.
Have you made any progress, Kate and Angel, as far as waste issues? Our local group is working on that, trying to, work on this, because the problem of all the waste being dumped in our neighborhoods, and we're trying to make some progress in terms of zero waste movements.
Yes, I'm glad you said that. Yeah, we're doing the same. We've found two things to be successful. One is advocating for each municipality to not send their trash, so ending trash contract. And that's meant organizing with a really broad group of advocates from different municipalities. I think they've gotten at least 12 to cancel their contracts with the trash to steam incinerator, which takes money out of the trash to steam incinerator and makes it harder for them to continue their operations. And the second is we created a New Jersey anti-incineration campaign where we're partnering with every city in New Jersey that has an incinerator. And we're working now together to create a curriculum and to educate each of our communities collectively that we're all facing this burden. And there's, zero waste strategies that we can move towards, but not while we still have, all of the trash going to incinerators.
Yeah, it's crazy, because one of the things that I'm thinking of is, why do we have in our society garbage pickup? Why don't we say to people, there's going to be no more garbage pickup. You're responsible in your own life for not producing any waste, not buying things that are going to create waste, not using things that are going to be waste, because, it's kind of crazy the way we've just adopted this thing where people just put out garbage and put out all this stuff. It's such a crazy mentality. When you read Laudato Si, it's like we need this conversion to a whole different type of mentality.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
I think one of for zero waste here in CF, we had an amazing conversation today with our local university. Is also the thinking of is not 100% on the consumer. We have to go upstream, right? We have to have a conversation with those producing entities, right? Those brands who are creating products that aren't compostable or recyclable. Normally, especially in EJ communities, those are the products that people can afford, right? So if you're targeting people that could afford these things, but you're not making these products recyclable, compostable, then you're at fault as well. And it's a lot harder for people who don't know and or who are strapped by I say their wallet be able to make these decisions.
Good point.
Julia, it looks like you have a question.
Sure. Yeah, thank you so much for taking my question. Concerning environmental health, have your communities been able to develop some strategies or regulations to work on the concept of precautionary principles? Here in New Hampshire, we were fighting a pipeline, and fortunately, we were able to stop it. But in the process, we realized that there were some real probabilities that should it go in before we had stopped it, that we would need to make sure that we understood what was the sort of level of health of the individuals and the soil and the water before a company comes in. With you folks, it looks as though the horse has been out of the barn door, but nonetheless, at this point, you could still be doing baselines, because I'm sure there are going to be other companies trying to come in, or the companies there enlarging their holdings. Is that sort of discussion happening about how to do that protective measure for your communities?
We've tried two things. There's a sustainability ordinance in the city of Camden, which is supposed to require an environmental justice analysis anytime any new facility is proposed in the city, but it's not enforced. And the second is the new New Jersey Environmental Justice Bill should get to that, but the rules aren't created yet. So it makes it hard to enforce. But I would love to know more about the precautionary principles that you're talking about. Maybe we could chat about that, because that sounds fascinating to me.
Sure, I'll send you there. As a result of there was a group of maybe 7 folks that came together to really look at what had been done with other communities that had been impacted by compressor stations. So I'll make sure that I send you what I have, or we can communicate one way or the other.
Thank you, Julia. That would be amazing.
Gus, it looks like you have a question.
Sure. I just want to know, Kate or Angel, first of all, what we are doing is great. But my concern is this: when you are working for the community and preventing those factories for damaging the environment, do you know if you have any plan in place? Because those factories, okay, they cannot go to Camden, but they're going to go somewhere else and continue doing the damage. So how can you prevent these factories from continuing doing damage to others? Are you in connection with other communities that are experiencing the same problem, so you can help them and say, listen, this is what happened with us. Don't even think about this company, whatever. So I think that you get my point.
That's perfect, because the critique of the first wave of environmental justice movement was that it was just trying to place the facilities in other spaces more equally, rather than just annihilating them altogether. So you're right. And that's been one of our strategies, is to partner with, we've only done it so far with the incinerator, but we've partnered with every city in New Jersey that is also either facing an incinerator or has an incinerator, to create like a real cohesive plan to take it on more largely. There is some larger networks around called Energy Justice and Earth Justice, and we do collaborate with them, and that's more nationwide on larger issues as well. But yeah, that's a great point. How do we stop them from just going to the next EJ neighborhood?
I also just want to name and uplift that I was just making notes as you were talking, and I think that the work that you're doing is a really wonderful inspiration for us who are members of mostly Catholic organizations who are on this call, the Laudato Si Action platform is really calling us to collaboration. So sometimes we get stuck in our silos and we say, oh, I'm working with my parish, or I'm working at my school. But really, this is a great model of the power and the strength that we have when we unite with other groups, you know, maybe even outside of, you know, like the Catholic school, but maybe we work with organizations in our city to try to think more strategically and politically. So I think that that is just an awesome example. And I guess I have a question, just because I'm curious about this environmental justice bill that you all have created in New Jersey. Can you just talk a little bit about how you got that process started? Because that's amazing.
It started out of Newark, and they've been working on it for, I want to say 20 years or so. It has not been an easy fight. There's so much industry in New Jersey that has powerful lobbying capacity. And so it's been really hard for the EJ organizations to advocate for something that would hold industry even further accountable. But we believe that it was a mixture of the momentum and the shift towards Black Lives Matter, and that time where there was a real racial reckoning, that there was a really important open door to saying, hey, this is an issue of race and racism. And, you know, if we're claiming to be looking out for Black lives, then we need to make policies that match that. And so it was a really a good political time to finally push this through. And we had the right governor in place. And it just so happened it took years and years of organizing. But there's a powerful group called Ironbound, and they're out of Newark, New Jersey. And they've been an incredible model for environmental justice. They created the very first city cumulative impact bill. And I believe that was with Cory Booker. And there was, again, a lot of political momentum there, but it set the precedent for the state that it was possible, that we could do it. And yet we've built from there. And again, the rules aren't finished for the bill yet, but it has been a really participatory process. And we've sent in comments and been active in shaping what that policy will look like. So we're hopeful.
Thanks. And I just saw that Fran put a message in the chat, and then Fran, feel free to unmute if you'd like. But she said some of our environmental justice organizations are uncomfortable with working with mostly white environmental groups. Have you found any way to bridge that gap, or do you have any advice, since the reality is a lot of our institutions are really white?
Yeah, and there's been historically a lot of trauma caused by white organizations. And there's also, speaking as a white woman, there's just experiences that I will never understand. And so for me, it's about humility and recognizing that I need to step back and listen first, and not make it about me, not bring my own agenda, and just really humble myself to listen and to be present without taking action, without taking up space. And so it's taken me 2 to 3 years to gain the trust of the leadership in New Jersey. We are one of the only white-led organizations that are invited into a lot of these spaces. And I think that's just because of the kind of methods that I've used of being humble, being present, listening, and just adding my support whenever possible. There was an interesting moment recently. There's a bill being passed in New Jersey that would really push for electric buses. And the environmental movement was very excited about it, and they were calling it an environmental justice bill. When the environmental justice folks saw it, they saw the holes in it. It wasn't prioritizing communities of color. There was no language in the bill that would make sure that the electric buses went to the communities most impacted. And so they said, hey, we know that your intentions were good, but you can't call this an environmental justice bill without us at the table. And we could have shown you the gaps and the holes that were missing in this policy that would have really benefited our EJ communities. So, hey, next time, come to us first. And I think that was a really important learning lesson, that we can have all the best intentions, but we may not really understand the whole impact of a community of color, and need to acknowledge that leadership and listen and be humble about whatever we're doing, right? Checking in with each other, making sure that it's supportive.
I think that the biggest issue with that question, I agree with everything that Kate said. Having people there to listen and understand that your community comes from somewhere different. And I'm from Camden. I'm a Latino man. I've been raised in having a forest that I thought was a forest that was like actually a landfill my entire life that I did not know about, that I was running around playing in when I was smaller. But just have, and I think this, even with EJ working in the other work, when you have a white group trying to come in and help, just understanding that sometimes you're guests, and that you need to sit there and listen and learn, because my experience in Camden may reflect that of Newark, and may reflect that of Irvington, and reflect in New Brunswick, but we're a different place, right? With different people and different issues that happen, and learning and understanding what happens here may go a long way, and you can't copy and paste your advocacy throughout the state. And to go back to your question about community and coming together. I think one of the biggest issues that I've learned, and being new to the environmental justice movement, even though I've been in the social justice movement for a very long time, is that we tend to be very siloed, right? And we tend to only work with the groups that we know that we can work with. So one of the biggest things I think that can help the EJ movement, any other movement in general, is finding organizations that may not necessarily be a part of your group, but live in that moment, right? So we have organizations that help all throughout Camden, but are not technically classified as EJ organizations, but they help people in the EJ community, right? Those are great links to further your cause and find people who may not necessarily know what you're doing.
Thanks. Yeah, that's all very helpful feedback. Kate, did you have more to add to that?
I just saw there was a question in the chat about funding.
Perfect. Yeah. And the last thing that I want to say before we hop to funding is just, when I was hearing you talk about kind of this interdependence and also the grassroots movement, it really reminded me of the principle of subsidiarity in Catholic social teaching, right? So this is very central to what we believe, which is the idea that the local community has the knowledge to solve issues, and it should be solved at the most local level possible. So I think this idea of going and listening, right, especially if we are not a part of the local EJ communities who are in the grassroots doing this work, and just kind of building that relationship, like you said, Kate. It might take years to build that trust, if at all.
Yeah. To quickly answer the funding question, we are funded mostly, and Angel can speak to this because he's been writing a lot of grants, from grants and foundations currently.
Our main sources of funding come from grants and foundations. We also receive in-kind donations from organizations and people like you and everyone else who would like to help our organization grow. We take personal donations as well. Every little bit helps to push us to the next stage.
We sell our hot sauce and honey,
yes.
And our retreats also are a source of
yes.
income as well. But we're very deliberate in that we do not accept donations from any of the industries in our neighborhood, for obvious reasons. But
has the parish or diocese been helpful, Kate and Angel?
Yes, and our building is part of the diocese, and they've loaned that to us.
Nice. Beautiful work you do. Fantastic.
Thank you.
Marvelous. Marvelous.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. Does anyone else have any final questions for the large group? Alrighty, I'm gonna actually switch things up a little bit from how I normally do them, and I'm going to share a couple of announcements, and then we'll go and move into breakout groups, because I've realized that sometimes I lose people once we move into our breakout groups. And so just wanted to share a couple of resources that I hope will be helpful to you as you're continuing to think about environmental justice and the Laudato Si action platform. So the first one of these is last April, Catholic Climate Covenant, Laudato Si movement, the Sisters of Mercy of the Americas, ISN, and the Jesuit Conference put together a 21-day Catholic Environmental Justice Challenge. So it seems like a lot of folks who are on this call, are aware of environmental justice issues, but this is just, I think, a really good teaching resource for folks who are less aware of the interconnections between these issues. So I think this could be a great resource to use in your communities, or just pieces of it if you're trying to start this conversation. The other two things that I wanted to share are, we have two programs at ISN that are coming up. So we have the Laudato Si Lent program, in which each week throughout Lent, we'll be exploring one of the goals of the Laudato Si action platform. I am hoping to release a parish guide tomorrow that will have reflection questions, suggested concrete actions. And so I'm just hoping that will help with your journey. And then ISN also has a daily Lenten series called Harden Not Your Hearts. And so it's just a daily justice reflection throughout the season of Lent. So if you're interested in having something to read and ponder that is focused on justice issues throughout Lent, I highly encourage you to sign up for that. So thank you for putting up with my little commercial. So we have about 5 minutes left, which is not a very long time to do small group discussion. So I'm going to put the questions in the chat. They have formed into one blob, as they usually tend to do, but they're also available on the agenda. And that's a lot to cover. We're still a little bit of a big group, so anything that is on anyone's mind, we'll just take a few minutes before we wrap up.
Brenda,
Yes.
I'm Norma, and I'm a sister of St. Joseph from Baden, Pennsylvania. And we are very, very much involved with environmental issues and racist issues. So I just want to thank you for all the information that I have received that is new to me, especially from Camden and some of the things that you're doing. So I really appreciate it, and I will communicate some of the things that I've learned this afternoon with some of our sisters who are very much involved in both environmental and ecological issues and racist issues. So I'm sure we'd be very helpful to them, because I felt that I learned a lot this afternoon, my first live encounter with you.
Thank you. Thanks, sister. And I know that the LCWR is doing a really wonderful series about the interconnections of racial justice, climate change, and migration. So yeah, thanks for the great work that you're doing as well. And it looks like in the chat, Lisa said, I really like the idea Julie had about the CEOs need to live in the neighborhood where their industrial facilities are. Yeah, Fran, yeah. Oh, and you can unmute. Everyone should be able to unmute themselves.
Yeah, I get it. So I'm from Boston, and I belong to a broader group that's looking at legislative pieces. And this is why I asked the question about white groups and environmental justice groups, AKA more people of color, because even though all of us have got the same goals, it's been a little hard. People from the EJ communities, people of color, feel uncomfortable in some of our conversations. I think it's just, as Angel said, we haven't lived that experience, and so here we are, thinking about what would be best, and we need to listen to each other. But I've been trying to think of some justice outreach to suggest to some of our Boston people. We have an upcoming webinar on the platform. And the best thing I could think of was a project that has to do with heat islands, that some of our Boston communities are like, 20 degrees hotter when it gets really hot. And with the COVID restrictions, the cooling centers have been closed. So it makes it even worse. And so we've been looking for projects that might begin to address that. And there's one that I've seen about planting trees in environmental justice communities. Because if you look at maps of tree cover, definitely a difference, you know. So just some real practical hands-on things that people can do would be wonderful to hear about. We trying to get people to contact their legislators, even though that might be the best thing they can do. It's a really heavy lift, we've found. People just don't do it. But something like planting trees, you know, easier to understand. Any suggestions from people about what you could, what opportunities you could let lots of people know that they might be able to help with?
Angel, did you want to answer?
So, well, for in my opinion, I think one of the I think doing little projects like that, since they're more tangible, they're more, you can actually see the benefit of what's going on and planting trees, being able to cool down the area. I think when it comes to legislation and getting people to write their local legislator, their mayor, anything like that, especially for people of color have notoriously been disenfranchised by local government. So one of those things that is not really going to help me.
Mhm.
And that's just the mentality, and it's a shame. That's how most people of color think, but historically we haven't been wrong. So it's one of those things that it's an uphill battle for that. But when you do the tangible things, I can actually see what I'm doing changing. That's a perfect segue into having those conversations about that's like a letter to our legislator.
Yeah, we have the New Jersey Tree Foundation, which is an amazing model for urban tree planting. And then also, you know, sometimes there's opportunities to say, hey, would you like us as this broader, wider organization to get a sign-on letter going for you? You know, it may not be something you're interested in because it may not have a direct benefit right away, but is there a way we can use our influence, you know, and check the messaging with them first? But and there's really quick ways to do it on your phone where it just sends a link and folks just have to plug in their name and their zip code and it sends it for them. I find that usually helps get people to send messages.
And I just want to name that it's 4:02. So if anyone has to leave, please feel free, including our presenters. But I think Julia has another question.
Sure, just to respond to Fran, and with the work we did with the Kinder Morgan pipeline, we found, and in that situation, Western New Hampshire is rural, and so poverty is an issue. And that pipeline was supposed to go through Massachusetts, but the wealthy community said no. So the company just bumped it up into New Hampshire thinking they'd get an easy lift. Of course, we live free or die New Hampshire, so yay, it helped us, I guess. But the point of the whole thing is, it's come to my mind that I think it's very hard for people to be engaged in anything that regards politicism or activism in some way, because we just don't do it. It was frightening for me, and I'm, you know, a little educated white woman, and it was frightening for me. And I thought, how do our neighbors do this that have just emigrated here or are working 2 and 3 jobs, or are struggling with language? And I thought, my Lord, how do we do this? So and we didn't have large cities, and so our communities of color were pretty small that we were working with. But in general, if even the white folk can't send because they're scared, then it's going to be doubly hard. But what we did do was we used postcards, and we chose 3 different issues, and we used postcards, and we made up a coloring card as well. That was a postcard that was coloring, so that we could give it to a family and say, you know, and even we put stamps on many of them, because again, if someone's working 2 or 3 jobs, they're not going to have time to figure out how to write, where to write, etc. It's just, or they might not even have the stuff to do it on, because they're just running from one issue to the next. And so we found that postcards were at least a way for people to be a part of something. And maybe they didn't all, you know, send in their postcards, but it was close, it was in their hand. And if you're in the streets handing things out, or if you know of a community leader that people trust and you give it to them, and then they're giving it to them, it has much more cred than credibility than otherwise.
Alrighty, so I just want to say thank you again to Kate and Angel for your time and for sharing a bit about the great work that you're doing. I think it's an inspiration to all of us to really dig into our local communities and to listen and to learn, and maybe to, even just do some research and attend some meetings and listen, and just to start that relationship building. So thank you for being here. Our next conversation will be Tuesday, March 22nd at 3:30 p.m. And there will be a focus on ecological education. We'll have a teacher from Regis High School in New York who is going to be speaking about her students' Laudato Si action plans that they kind of generated in the school, issues that they were excited about. And so I'm excited for her to be able to share that work and kind of youth engagement in this process. So thank you, everyone, and we will see you again next month.